Hi, my name is Eddie Charlie. I'm from Duncan, British Columbia. I'm one of the co-organizers of Victoria Earnshirt. And, I started doing this work with Kristen Spray in 2015 while we were still students at Commotion College. And one of the things that we do is we go out in the community to create awareness about the effects of residential school, um, actual survivors of residential school, and their community and family. Um, there were 139 residential schools in Canada, and there were 150,000 children taken away from their homes and placed in these residential schools. One of the things I want to mention is that 139 residential schools and 150,000 children are estimates because no complete records are kept of what happened when children were removed from their homes and placed in residential schools. So this is just an estimate. I just want to get that out there right now. Um, Now, all the children that were taken away from their home, many of them were like 4.5 years old, and they stayed there for 10 years or longer. Some of them were there till they were at least 16 or 17 years old. While they were in the residential school, they experienced starvation, neglect, physical abuse, and sex abuse. And a lot of children were given disease just to see what their reaction to the disease were. And the children that were starved were forcibly starved just so they can watch and see what happens. Now, a lot of children were beaten for speaking their own language or practicing their culture while they were in these residential schools. And many teachers and dorm supervisors carried leather straps and big long rulers that they used to beat the children every time they were caught breaking the rules. It's a really long journey for many residential school survivors to actually find the courage to stand up and say, this is something that happened to me when I was a child. So I want to ask people to recognize that it takes a lot of courage for them to speak about what happened to them when they were tiny little children. It often triggers them quite bad when they speak about it, and it also triggers them when they hear about it. So please honor and respect and be patient when you hear the stories of residential school survivors. Even if you hear it over and over again, keep on listening to these stories. Every time you listen to these stories, you'll give validation to these residential school survivors, and they find the courage to stand up and speak about their own experiences. Um, this is a really hard thing for many of us to do. For me, I've been silent for 50 years of my life before I finally start talking about what happened to me when I was a tiny little child. And every day that I go out in the community, I take a huge risk because I spend most of my life as an alcoholic. The one way that I could deal with the trauma that was in here, it was my way of trying to hide and run away from what residential school did to me. And I think there are many, many other residential school survivors who are doing the same thing. Now, I want to tell you a little thing. Residential school tried everything they could to destroy the Indian in the child. They beat them, they sexually abused them, they starved them, they kept them away from their families. And I know it's hard for people to try to imagine it. But when you lose a child that's 4.5 years old and you don't see them for 10 years, and then they come back home, your reaction to their return is going to be real different. So many residential school survivors, when they went home, they were traumatized again because they didn't feel like they had a place of belonging. They didn't feel like they belonged in their community anymore. They didn't have their language, they didn't have their culture, and they didn't have their beliefs and their tradition. So, what residential school didn't destroy, us residential school survivors did. Residential school survivors were created into some of the most perfect hate machines by the abuse that they experienced in residential school. All the beatings, all the sex rapes, it just emotionally destroyed us. It took our spirit apart, and we've never been able to build it back together again. So I just want to get that out there and make sure that people understand that wherever you go, no matter how many times you hear it, listen to it again, because sometimes when I go out there in the community, people say, why are you still talking about residential school? It happened so long ago. Forget about it and move on. It doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. We are still being traumatized, and we still being destroyed slowly inside our spirit. And I'd like to be able to leave something for my children and my grandchildren and future generations, so that at least they have something that can be positive, instead of having to live a cycle of violence and abuse all over again. And I sometimes feel so sad that I didn't speak about this a long time ago, so that people would understand more fully what happened to residential school survivors, and why we are the way we are, why we drink so much, why we don't finish school, and why many of us have trouble keeping jobs. I know it sounds so much like I'm trying to hunt for sympathy, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get you, the general population, including our people, all the residential school survivors, to understand that the more we talk about residential school, the greater chance we have of healing. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much. Hi, Scott CM.